Hey everybody, welcome to the BWC Online Bible Study. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 41. As we look at Genesis 41 today, we're going to be talking about Joseph. And if you'll remember, if you've been following along from the past several weeks, that we have talked about Joseph being sold into slavery. His brothers were very jealous of him. His father played favorites, and then he kind of got a big head about some dreams that God had given to him. He shared them with his brothers, and they became just angry and jealous, and they wanted to kill him, but instead they decided to sell him into slavery. So he spends probably about 10 years as a slave in Potiphar's house, and during that time Potiphar's wife becomes very attracted to Joseph, and she keeps trying to get Joseph to sleep with her, and he won't do it. He's going to do the right thing. He is not doing this. So then she becomes so angry that because she has thrown herself at him and he has rejected her, and so she accuses him of rape or being inappropriate with her, at which point Joseph then gets thrown into prison. And he has spent probably a year or so there at a time when someone there, two of the guys that were there, had dreams. And he interprets the dreams. God gives him the interpretation for the dreams, and he tells them not to forget him, to tell the Pharaoh about him. And the guy doesn't. He doesn't tell the Pharaoh about him. So another 2 years have passed. So you think about the number of years that are piling up here, that Joseph has been just in a bad situation after another bad situation, and yet still he continues to have the favor of God. He's not walking in everything that he had seen in the visions and the dreams, but he honors God regardless, where he's at, what he's going through in this moment. When he had visions and dreams, he had visions and dreams of his family bowing down, of his father bowing down, and it just didn't make sense, if you look at what's happening in his life. But we're about to see that kind of come to a head. We're going to see what God was trying to tell him so long ago. So Joseph has spent all this time in slavery, all this time in prison. And so it starts off in chapter 41, 2 full years later. So sometimes we get so frustrated when we're waiting on God for things. When God has shown us something, maybe he's given you a vision or a dream, or maybe you have been praying for something for a long time. Just think about the amount of time that passed from the time that Joseph had the vision and dream to now. So all the things that he went through are preparation for what God's going to do in his life in this next stage, in this next era that he's fixing to walk into. But throughout all of it, he remains faithful to the Lord. He seeks God. You see it in the people who are around him. They recognize it in him. They see it in him, and he shares it. And so 2 full years later, still in prison, still, just in all these terrible circumstances, you still see Joseph honoring the Lord. So it says 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. So the Pharaoh's like the king. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come out to the river and begin grazing in the marsh and the grass. And then he saw 7 more cows come up from behind the Nile that were scrawny and thin, and these cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Scrawny, thin cows then ate the 7 healthy fat cows, and at this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. But he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. 7 more heads of grain appeared that were shriveled and withered by the east wind, and these had swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then the Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. So the next morning the Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called the magicians and the wise men in Egypt, and the Pharaoh told them his dreams, and not one of them could tell him what they meant. So sometimes when you have a dream from God, it's not like a normal dream. Like, you can't shake it. I've had visions and dreams that have come from the Lord, and you don't always understand them. Like, you think about Joseph's dreams from all those 12 years ago. He didn't understand what that meant. But here we have the Pharaoh who is having dreams, and the dreams, like, he can't shake them. He woke up in the morning and he can't let them go. So it's not like a regular dream. And it says, the next morning the Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called, well, we read that already. It says, finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. So this is so much that everybody around the Pharaoh hears all of this that's going on. And the cupbearer says, today I have been reminded of my failure, he told the Pharaoh. Some time ago you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on the pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once. He was quickly brought from the prison and shaved, and his clothes were changed, and then he stood before the Pharaoh. Then the Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. So here, all of a sudden, suddenly, it's really not suddenly because it's like 13 years later, but suddenly, in the middle of all of the circumstances and the situations that Joseph has walked through to get to this point, something is about to change. He is taken from the prison, he's shaved, he's cleaned, and he's brought before the king of Egypt. And he's about to see everything that he has dreamed begin to come to pass. It says, this was Joseph's answer. It says, it is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. So even in this moment, Joseph is not, he's the one who interpreted the dreams of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. But he knows it wasn't because of he himself. It is because of what the Lord was doing. And he doesn't, try to applaud himself. He says, I can't do this. Well, it's like when you go pray for somebody, or you are helping somebody, or God gives you wisdom. Like, it's so wise to understand that you are not the one that answers the prayers. You are not the superhero that saves the day. It feels good to go in and help someone. It feels good to bless them. But at the same time, we know that the Lord is the one who heals. He is the one who comes in to save the day. And we need to always put that focus toward Him. And that's what Joseph's doing here. It's beyond his power to do this. He can't get the interpretation for the dream. He can't understand what it means. It's the Lord that helps him to do this. So the Pharaoh told Joseph his dream, and then so he repeats it again. It says, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River. I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up from the river and begin to graze on the marsh grass. Then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after. And I've never seen such sorry-looking animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the 7 fat cows. But afterward, you wouldn't have known it if they were still as thin and scrawny as before. And then I woke up, and in my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful and growing on a single stalk. 7 more heads of grain appeared, and these were blighted and shriveled and withered by the east wind. Shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads, and I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded. So the Lord gives Joseph the interpretation, and he gives it to the Pharaoh. He says both of these dreams mean the same thing. God is telling the Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin scrawny cows came up later than the 7 thin healthy heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. This is what will happen, just as I have described it, for God has revealed to the Pharaoh in advance what he's about to do. The 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. Famine will destroy the land, and the famine will also be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. That's why the scrawny cows ate up the healthy cows. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. Therefore, and so God said it more than one time. You know, a lot of times when you begin to read the Bible, or the Lord speaks to you, or maybe you've had visions and dreams, when God says something more than one time, he's really calling attention to it. He's making sure that you hear what he says. And it says, therefore the Pharaoh should find an intelligent wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. And then the Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather the food produced in the years of good and that are just ahead to bring to the Pharaoh's storehouse and store it away. The guard will also be there with the food, will be and a guard and guard it, so there will be food in the cities. This way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise the famine will destroy the land. So he not only gives him the vision and dream, he doesn't just sit there with the bad news. God gives him a solution to the problem. This is what you need to do. The 7 years of famine is coming. You don't have to just enjoy the great 7 years and then wait to be destroyed afterward. Do something about it. Let's save up. Let's put some back. Let's be prepared for what's about to come, because the Lord is warning you that this is coming. And so many times, I feel like God will let us in on something that's about to come. Even like reading from the book of Revelation, like you're reading about the end times and you see all this is about to come. But what are you doing to prepare in the meantime? What are you doing to prepare your heart, to prepare yourself? We know there's going to come a day that we're all going to stand before the presence of the Lord. What are you doing to prepare yourself for that day? Are you growing in relationship with him? Are you sitting in fear and dread because he's going to tell you everything you did? And you'll be ready for the shame that's to come? Or can you turn your heart toward God and turn your decisions toward God and follow after what he wants you to do? So here the Pharaoh has a choice. Will he listen to this? Will he do what God says? Or will he just continue on? And it says, so Joseph's suggestions were all well received by the Pharaoh and the officials. So the Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Like the Spirit of God is evident on Joseph. And then the Pharaoh says to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of these dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent and as wise as you are. You will be placed in charge of my court. All of the people will take orders from you, and only I, sitting on my throne, will have rank higher than you. The Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. The Pharaoh removed the signet ring from his hand and he placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and he hung a gold chain around his neck. And then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. Whenever Joseph went out, the command shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or a foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. When the Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, he also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath, and then he was whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, and Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Egypt. When Joseph left the Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. As predicted, for 7 years the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops that had grown in Egypt, and he stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled them up high. The amounts of grain were like the sands on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. During that time, before the first of the famine, two sons were born to Joseph: Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, and the priest of On. Joseph named his older son Manasseh. He said, "God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family." Joseph named his second son Ephraim, and he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my grief." At last, 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land came to an end. So I just want to pause right there for a second, and realize that it was hard for Joseph. We read through this story and we read 2 years went by. Well, to us, that's one sentence. To him, that's 2 full years. We read he was the slave in Egypt, and we know how it turns out if you read your Bible, but this was really hard for him. And he proclaims that here. He's rejoicing in the moment that he's in, how good it feels to finally step out of the prison cell of a place that he was accused that he didn't belong in, to step out of slavery and to step into a position that God had created for him. And so when we look at that, maybe you're in the middle of the throes of whatever it is that you're going through, and you're having that hard time. I just want to encourage you not to give up in the middle of the hard time, to stay faithful to God. Joseph so clearly had the Spirit of God on him even after he had been through this 12 to 13 years of just awful things and been ripped away from his father and his family, and his brothers had betrayed him, all these things that he went through. He still remained close to God. And so that's what I want to encourage you today. If you're kind of in the throes of it, if you're in the middle of going through something that's really difficult and hard, that you remain close and connected to God. It wasn't easy for Joseph. You see that in the way that he named his children. God has made me fruitful in the land of my grief. He grieved being separated from his family. God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's house. He had been through so much with his family and through so much that just broke his heart and was hard for him. And now he's walking in this blessing, and God was with him the whole time. Whether it was the hard times or the times of plenty, God was with him. And so that's what we see happening here. His proclamations as he named his children. It says, "Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted." See, Joseph didn't hide the truth from Pharaoh and only tell him the good parts. Sometimes I feel like when we are people of faith, we don't want to acknowledge that there are difficult parts, there are hard things. But God is the one who helps us get through those hard things. We turn our hearts toward Him. We prepare ourselves to stay close to Him in a difficult season, because people are not always going to do everything right. If everyone would stand in faith and do everything that God called them to do, then we would never have a struggle. We would never have a hard time. We would never have to go through anything bad or hard. But that's just not the way this life is. So many people aren't following the Lord, and they're doing things that cause trauma and pain. And then there's just the truth that there's sickness and disease in this world, and that we need God to help us through those things. We don't have to pretend like they're not here. It's okay for us to stand in faith and acknowledge the fact that we're going through something. Joseph had gone through something, but he stayed close to God the entire time. And God brought him out of that. And so he didn't hide the fact that there was going to be a famine from the Pharaoh. The Lord told him there was going to be a famine, and he relayed that message. And they began to prepare for what was ahead. And it says, the famine also struck the surrounding countries, and throughout Egypt there was plenty of food, because they had prepared for it. Eventually, however, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. When the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." So with the severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and he distributed the grain for the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt, and the people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe throughout the world. So Joseph, even though he had been through some extremely difficult times, he honored God in the middle of it. Everybody in his life did not do everything right, even him in his younger years. If you look back, his father played favorites, which made his brothers jealous. His brothers were jealous, which is not okay. And then Joseph, having these dreams from the God that came from God, he tells his brothers, who are already jealous of him, about these dreams of them coming and bowing down before him, which made them even more jealous. And so then, Potiphar's wife, after he's sold into slavery, she lies on him and gets him thrown into jail. The guys that he interpreted the dreams for, they didn't, well, the one was killed, but the other that lived, didn't tell Pharaoh about him, left him there to rot for a couple more years. Everybody did everything wrong, and God still made it happen. If it's God's plan and its purpose, I'm going to read the scripture to you. I've said it several times lately. It's Isaiah 46:11. It says, "I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, and I will also do it." God did it. He's the one who gave Joseph the dream. He's the one who showed him the visions. He's the one who gave him the interpretations, and he's the one who opened the door for him to be second in command of all of Egypt. And so, in this, we see that we can honor God in a hard time. We can trust him when we don't understand. We don't have to hide from the truth. We can declare that this is going on, but that we are trusting God in the middle of it, that we know that he is our healer, that he is our helper, that he is our guide, that he's the one that we need to seek in times of trouble. And when God tells us something, that we not hide from the difficult parts, but that we lean into him during those difficult parts so that he can bring us out to the other side. So that's what I want to leave you with today. Genesis chapter 41, and I will catch you guys back again in Genesis chapter 42.